Ben was not a person who scared easily. He didn't let fear control him. He's had bullets whizzing by his head, rocket-propelled grenades explode less than 10 yards away. He knew what it was like to jump from an airplane under gunfire. He's been through it all. He knows what it's like to live as if it might be his last day on this earth. Yet he was never afraid. He can only remember one time in his life when he truly felt uncontrollable terror. The kind of fear that makes you cry, tremble, and completely lose control. It was a moment so intense, so real to him, yet no one except his best friend ever believed what he went through was true. His family didn't believe him, his wife didn't believe him, but he's long past the point of staying silent. He understands now that his story has to be told, regardless of who listens. Growing up in the middle of nowhere shaped him in a few ways few could understand. What's up, Night God family? Night God here, and I've got something super cool to share with you today. So I've been working on sprucing up my place a bit lately, and Legendary Wall Art just sent me one of the most stunning pieces I have ever seen. Seriously, if you're looking for a way to bring some personality and style into your home, these guys have you covered. Legendary Wall Art specializes in high quality, one-of-a-kind pieces that really make your walls pop. Whether you're into vibrant landscapes, jaw-dropping abstracts, or even minimalistic designs, they have something for everyone. The craftsmanship is incredible, and the attention to detail in their prints really blew me away. It's not just about filling up wall space, it's about making a statement. What's even better, I've teamed up with them to get you an exclusive discount. All you have to do is head over to legendarywallart.net/nightgod and use code Kyle25 at the checkout to snag 25% off your order. Trust me, you don't want to miss this opportunity. His grandparents lived just down the road, and his best friend John's family was right next door. Other houses were scattered around, but too far apart to be considered neighbors. From a young age, he learned to hunt, fish, and survive in the woods, skills passed down from his father, who had grown up in the country. His mother, a city girl, balanced that ruggedness by teaching him art, science, and cooking. This blend of both worlds made him who he was. But even with all that grounding, no one but John ever believed what he had experienced. In high school, he played multiple sports, but by graduation, he felt the pull of something more. Joining the Army Reserve set him on a new path. After excelling in basic training and AIT, he pursued a degree in computer engineering while balancing military service through ROTC. After college, he completed the Army's Basic Officer Leader course and was soon deployed to Iraq as a second lieutenant. Leading a platoon was a heavy responsibility, but he managed it with resilience. They were good at what they did, and command frequently sent them on dangerous missions. The adrenaline wore off though after a year, but despite the close calls, they all came home battered and bruised, but alive. Despite the chaos, he kept up with his computer engineering skills, knowing he'd need a fallback someday. That foresight paid off when he landed a job 2 hours from home. Returning in August, with the job starting in January, he had a little time to relax. Living with his parents, he eagerly anticipated the fall bow hunting season, which he had missed for the past 2 years due to deployment. Excited, he unpacked his hunting gear and headed out early one September morning to scout for a spot. As he stepped out the front door, backpack full of gear, he noticed John and his father standing in the backyard near their chicken pen. John was bigger than him, not college educated, but skilled with his hands, working in construction. He was living with his parents while building his own house in his free time on some land he'd bought a few miles away. "Morning," Ben called out as he lumbered over with his gear to where they were standing. "What's up, bro?" John replied with a half smile. "Just heading out to do some scouting for bow season." He noticed the pen door was open, and both John and his father were eyeing it curiously. John's dad was slowly moving the door back and forth, testing the latch as if something wasn't quite right. "I don't know," John's dad said, puzzled. "The latch is too high for a raccoon, unless they climbed the wire fence and somehow opened it." "I've seen them do some pretty crafty things. They're smart," John replied before turning his back to him. "It's the second time in 2 weeks something or someone has gotten into the chicken coop. Took a chicken last week and 2 more last night. Could be those damn kids who ride their ATVs through the woods, or it might be raccoons. Either way, we're gonna have to padlock them now. Town kids must be getting bored if they're stealing chickens," Ben said with a sarcastic smirk. The local kids from the nearest town were always up to something. Pranks, minor acts of vandalism, or the occasional petty theft. Most of the time it was harmless, like broken mailboxes or some penis-shaped graffiti on a garage door. Nothing that couldn't be fixed or cleaned up. Before he headed into the woods, John had told him to scout Crow Hill. He mentioned there had been a lot of deer activity in that area and would have set up his tree stand there, except his girlfriend's dad had offered him the chance to hunt on their family farm instead. Crow Hill was a densely wooded area about 3/4 of a mile from their houses. Half of the hill was covered in thick pines, where murders of crows would often gather in noisy groups. The pines came to an abrupt end, opening up into a hardwood forest with dense underbrush covering the other half of the hill. It was a perfect spot for scouting deer. The leaves had just started to fall, and the crisp air filled him with excitement. By the time he reached the top of Crow Hill, he had already spotted several deer and signs of their presence. As he crested the hill, a loud snort like a blast of air rang out, instantly heightening his senses. He quickly scanned the area, and then he saw it. There it goes, there it goes, he thought excitedly, watching two sets of large antlers glide over top of the underbrush before vanishing into the pine forest. He made his way to the border of the forest where the deer had disappeared. It felt like a meeting of two worlds. On one side, the hardwood forest was alive with light, the golden autumn sun filtering through the leaves, casting a warm glow on the forest floor. But just ahead, the pine trees stood like sentinels, their thick branches blocking out almost all light. The ground beneath them was shadowy and dark, the air cooler and filled with an unsettling quiet. It was almost eerie, a place where the familiar world of daylight seemed to vanish into something more mysterious and unknown. Despite the creeping sense of unease, he didn't care. His eyes were fixed on signs all around him. Deer tracks pressed into the soft earth, rubs on tree trunks, droppings scattered nearby. This was it, the spot. The thrill of the hunt surged through him, his senses alive with anticipation of what might be hiding just beyond the dark veil of the pines. He turned in slow circles, scanning the trees, searching for the perfect one to attach his ladder stand to. As he spun, something to his left caught his eye. About 10 yards away, there was a patch of ground that looked as though it had been deliberately cleared of leaves in a circular pattern. Curiosity piqued. He moved closer, his pulse quickening. What the hell? He muttered to himself, eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. In the center of the circle lay the body of a house cat, or what was left of it. The limbs were scattered half-assedly around the circle, the head missing entirely, and the rest of the body reduced to skin and bones. The cat had clearly been there a while. But the odd thing wasn't just its gruesome condition. Around the body were strange markings, lines, and circles etched into the dirt, as if someone had drawn symbols around the remains. Damn kids, he thought. It had to be the Towns kids again, probably finding the cat, likely killed by a coyote or bobcat, and trying to make it look spooky with those strange symbols. The empty beer bottle nearby confirmed his theory. Despite how unsettling the sight was, his mind quickly shifted back to deer hunting. Whatever those kids were up to, it wasn't his concern. He brushed off the eerie discovery, dismissing it as another one of their stupid pranks, and refocused on the task at hand. He brushed off the unsettling find and resumed searching for a good tree. His eyes settled on a large tree perfectly positioned between the edge of the hill he had just climbed and the dark expanse of the pine forest. A bit of a clearing ran from the base of the tree to the hill's edge, making it an ideal spot. Pulling his large bowie knife from his backpack, he set to work, cutting away small shrubs and branches, clearing a path for himself. The sharp blades sliced through the undergrowth with ease. As he was nearly finished, the flapping of wings and the familiar squawking of a murder of crows broke the stillness, echoing from the pine forest. Something had spooked them. Then came the low hum and hiss of an ATV engine, growing louder as it passed by. That's probably what scared the birds, he thought. He figured he must be near one of them trails that ran behind the houses. He paused for a moment, listening as the sound of the engine faded into the distance, before returning to his work, ready to set up for the hunt. He made his way through the underbrush, heading towards the sound of the ATV. Just 20 yards from the tree he had chosen, he came across a dirt ATV path. Taking his bowie knife out again, he cleared out a walkway from the tree to the path, marking both the tree and the trail with a ribbon for later. Satisfied, he followed the path back until the familiar woods behind his house came into view. It was a perfect setup, an easy path to follow, and he wouldn't have to worry about scaring off any deer as he made his way to and from the tree stand. The next day, him and his buddy John took the four-wheeler up to the tree where he had marked off, setting up the ladder stand. He had since forgotten about the cat he'd found the day before. The stand seat and platform were about 25 feet off the ground, just the right height. From up there, he had a clear viewing of everything, from the ATV path behind him to the edge of the hill in front. It felt like the perfect spot, and with bow season just a few weeks away, he was eager to start hunting. When the season finally arrived, he spent his days and evenings in the woods, ready for the moment he'd been waiting for. Each day, he'd walk the familiar path through the forest as he approached his tree stand. With ease, he climbed up, settling into the stand that now felt like a second home. He saw plenty of deer and even a few bucks that he considered worth shooting. But he was holding out for the two monsters he'd seen when he was scouting. One of those bucks was what he was after. He always brought his cell phone with him, keeping it on silent just in case of an emergency. Strangely enough, living near radio towers, he got great reception from his tree stand. When things were slow, he would take pictures of the beautiful scenery around him or send texts to John, mocking him about the size of the deer he was going to shoot compared to anything John would get on his girlfriend's farm. And when the forest went still, games like Angry Birds helped pass the time. The day, or night rather, he felt real fear for the first time was October 23rd. It had been a cool, overcast day, perfect for hunting. He had errands to run in the morning and had promised his father to help with some housework in the afternoon, leaving only the evening for hunt, which was perfect to him. It meant he could hunt during the twilight hour, or as hunters call it, the magic hour. The last hour before sunset, when the world seems to glow a little brighter before darkness falls and all the animals begin to move. He pulled into the driveway and saw his father talking to Mr. Dawson, one of the neighbors. "How are you, Mr. Dawson?" Ben asked, stepping out of the car. "Oh, just fine. Glad to see you're home from overseas, Ben," Dawson replied with a smile, his black lab at his side. "Jake mentioned someone took his rabbits," his father said. "I told him about John's chickens." "Probably those town kids again," Dawson added. "They broke the chain clean off the pen last night, probably with bolt cutters. Now I've got to get a new lock." Later that evening, with his backpack and his bow in his hand, he headed into the woods. Just as he entered, he heard John's voice from the porch. "Got my deer this morning. Come over for a beer when you're done," John called. "Sure, after I get that big one walking right under my tree stand," he replied with a grin. It was a good 25 to 30-minute walk to his tree stand. By the time he arrived, he was tired, but the adrenaline kept him going. He moved silently through the brush to the tree, ascended the ladder, and pulled his backpack and bow up after him with a rope without making a sound. Once settled into the seat of his stand, with his bow on the hook, a sense of complete peace washed over him. He was surrounded by beautiful nature, even on this overcast day. He pulled his phone from his backpack, checked the time, 5:03 p.m., perfect. The magic hour would start early because of the cloud cover, and excitement coursed through his veins. Everything felt perfect. The wind was in his face, so any deer coming over the hill or out of the pine forest wouldn't catch his scent. Smaller animals scurried across the forest floor, headed to their burrows or nests for the night. And in the distance, the faint hoot of an owl echoed, signaling the start of the evening hunt. 5:55. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and let his eyes adjust to the dimming light. His adrenaline surged as thoughts of one of those large bucks coming within shooting range raced through his mind like wildfire. Knowing he'd be walking home in the dark, he had packed a flashlight, and he quickly double-checked to make sure it was still in his bag. That's when he heard it, the unmistakable crunch of leaves. His eyes shot wide open, and his ears strained to pinpoint the source of the sound. This wasn't a small animal. The rhythmic, deliberate crunch told him something heavier was moving through the underbrush. There it was. The noise was coming from just over the hill's edge. His heart pounding, he reached into his backpack and carefully pulled out a pair of small binoculars. Peering through them, he scanned the area. His pulse quickened. It was a deer. Through the branches, he could make out the grayish-brown fur of the figure moving closer, but he couldn't yet tell if it was a buck or a doe. Just 10 more yards, and he'd have a clear view and a long shot. He slung the binoculars around his neck and quietly got ready to stand, his breath steadying as he prepared for the moment. It stopped, as if it didn't want to step into the clearing at the edge of the hill. The light was fading fast, and he feared he wouldn't get a shot at it. His heart sank as the deer moved left, disappearing deeper into the brush. He started to relax, accepting the fact that it wasn't going to come close enough to get a shot. But then he realized it was still moving, edging closer, but through the thicker brush on the left side of the clearing. He stood up slowly, his left hand gripping his bow. Only about 20 minutes of light remained, and he needed to make sure the shot was clean. He could hear the deer now, just 30 yards ahead in the brush, close enough for a shot, but still hidden, his heart pounding harder. He couldn't see it, but he knew it was about to step into the clearing. As his body buzzed with anticipation, sweat beginning to form as his excitement grew. So focused on the deer, he didn't notice the eerie silence that had taken over the forest. He reached for his bow, preparing for the moment when the deer began to move out into the clearing. What the hell is that? From behind the bush appeared an arm, long, black, leathery, and with less than 5 fingers. It stretched out, planting its palm on the ground. A shock shot up his spine. The hair on the back of his neck stood straight up as his body began to shake uncontrollably. His left hand dropped to his side, and his legs buckled under the weight of his body, sending him silently thumping back into his seat. He grabbed his binoculars, lifting them slowly to his face, not wanting to take any sudden movements. He couldn't risk whatever this thing was, knowing he was there. Was this a person? Through the binoculars, he watched as the rest of the creature emerged from behind the bushes. Its skin was leathery, its legs unnaturally long. It looked human-like, but it wasn't human. It moved in a low crouch, and he could see something in its left hand, something brown. He squinted through the fading light, struggling to adjust its vision. It was a rabbit, not a wild one, but a rabbit like the kind Mr. Dawson kept and raised. Fear gripped him no matter how much he tried to push it away. He had been trained to fight and to hunt, but this thing was beyond anything he had ever encountered. How could he possibly confront it? He sure as hell couldn't leave the tree stand now. Then the smell hit him, pungent and sickening, burning flesh. He had smelled it once before in Iraq, and it nauseated him. The air around him reeked with the presence of this creature. His binoculars were glued to his face. What is it doing? The creature meticulously cleared the leaves around its feet in a circle, working with unsettling precision. He watched in horror as it raised the rabbit above its head. Its eyes, those horrible yellow eyes, had no clear center or pupil. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque half-smile, revealing a set of deformed, jagged teeth. Then its lower jaw unhinged, hanging loosely beneath its upper jaw. Slowly, it placed the rabbit's head in its mouth. Faster than a mousetrap, the jaw snapped shut, and the creature violently jerked, ripping the rabbit's head from its body. The sharp snap of the bones breaking sent a chill straight up his spine. The creature gripped the rabbit by its back legs, holding the lifeless body upside down. Blood poured from the animal's corpse, splashing onto the cleared ground below. It shook the body up and down as if trying to drain every last drop of blood. And then came the sound, a sick, wheezing giggle, like a smoker struggling to breathe. His eyes welled up with tears. He couldn't fight it anymore. Fear gripped him in a way he'd never felt before. He was crying. The military officer who had been shot at, nearly blown up, jumped out of airplanes, was now crying. It was almost completely dark, but he could still make out what the creature was doing. He slowly lowered the binoculars, concentrating on keeping his breath steady, trying not to cry out in terror. Snap, snap, snap. His head jerked backwards towards the creature. Every snap sent another shock of fear up his spine. The creature was dismembering the rabbit, piece by piece. The crackling of the bones sent violent shivers through his body. He watched as the creature meticulously placed each part of the rabbit's dismembered body within the circle it had cleared. Its long, bony fingers traced random forms in the dirt around the remains. It then lifted its hand, extending one of its grotesque fingers. Ben bit down on his lip, hard enough to nearly draw blood, desperately trying to keep from making a sound, as he watched it scoop the entrails from the rabbit's chest cavity and place them into its mouth. As the last bit of light faded from the sky, dread washed over him. He realized he would be stuck in the tree stand unless the creature left. I should text John to come get me, but then panic seized him. No, what if he sees the glow from my phone screen? What if he comes and it kills him? His mind raced, thoughts spiraling out of control. He hadn't even noticed the wind change. In the final silver of twilight, the creature suddenly froze, as if it sensed something. His heart sank. Tears silently streamed down his cheeks, and he could feel his hair standing on end. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and sweat poured from his body. He didn't dare move. Suddenly, like a dog, it raised its head and began jerking it up and down, sniffing the air. Shit, the wind has changed. It can smell him. The creature sniffed the air in 3 different directions with deep, guttural snorts. Then, without warning, it dropped low to the ground, its body tense as if preparing to pounce. The wind was at its back. It knew he was there. Maybe not his exact location, but it was aware of his presence. As the last bit of light faded, he watched in terror as it slunk back into the brush on the left side of the clearing. His heart pounded so hard that it sent a sharp pain through his chest. He wanted to scream, to cry out for help. He wanted to grab his phone and call someone, his friend, his parents, anyone who might be able to save him. But the woods were unnervingly silent, the air thick like a vacuum. He sat shaking uncontrollably in the tree stand. Crunch, 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 crunch. Shit! It was coming toward him from the left. His ladder was on the left side. God, what if it finds the ladder? Panic surged through him. I need to cut it down. The crunching grew louder. The creature was close enough that he could hear its incoherent rambling. It sounded like an old man, struggling for air, fighting for his last breath. Heart pounding, he reached into his backpack as fast as he quietly could, pulling out his knife. He stood up and turned to face the tree. Darkness swallowed everything. He couldn't see a thing, but his hands frantically felt along the rough bark, desperately searching for the cord holding the ladder to the tree. Ting! It was on the ladder. It's coming up the ladder. Panic coursed through him. Where's the cord? God, please! Then his fingers found it. He yanked hard, and the knife sliced through the cord with a sickening snap, like breaking bones. Without hesitation, he shoved the ladder away from the tree. He could feel the weight of the creature on it as it fell. With a thunderous boom, the ladder hit the ground, the creature crashing with it. A scream ripped through the air, piercing his ears and reverberating through the forest. He covered his ears, overwhelmed by the horrific sound. It was like the squeal of 100 pigs, mixed with the guttural roar that seemed to shake the night itself. He couldn't see in the darkness, but he knew he had enraged it. The sound of scrambling feet below told him the creature was already getting back up. He grabbed the tree to steady himself. The whole trunk was shaking. "It's climbing the tree." He could hear the creature's fingers gripping the bark, nails digging deep into the wood. There was only 20 feet between him and it. Heart hammering, he grabbed his bow, pulled back the string, aimed straight down, and released an arrow directly below the stand. The arrow hit the ground, and the creature unleashed a scream even louder than before, a horrific, ear-piercing wail, like the sound of 1,000 pigs screaming at once. Fear consumed him. His breathing became loud and ragged, and he was practically whimpering like a child. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might break his sternum. Tears blurred his vision, but it didn't matter. He couldn't see anything in the darkness anyway. Shaking, he fumbled another arrow from his quiver onto his bow. "God save me, please! Off!" he screamed as he let the arrow fly into the same spot as before. Another ear-splitting squeal filled the air, and the tree stopped shaking. He could hear the creature below, tearing at the ground with its fingers, ripping into the dirt and leaves. The sound came from directly beneath him. His hands trembled as he tried to knock another arrow, but the noise was closing in, surrounding him. It was to his right, then to his left, then below, then behind him. The tearing sounds were everywhere. "No, are there more of these things? I'm gonna die. Did it call others?" He pulled back his bow with his third arrow, but the noise was everywhere, suffocating him in the dark. Guessing blindly, he shot in the direction of the sound to his left. The creature's screams continued to reverberate in his skull, so loud that his ears rang. One arrow left. He scrambled to prep his last shot, terror overwhelming him. The noise surrounded him entirely, as if thousands of these things encircled him. The squealing intensified, the shrill cacophony unbearable. With no other choice, he drew back his bow one last time and fired the final arrow directly beneath his stand. The squealing roar became unbearable, louder than ever. It must have hit it. He was out of arrows. He dropped his bow and slumped back into his seat, overwhelmed. The noise was so intense that he didn't even hear the bow hit the ground. Trembling, he picked up his knife and clutched it to his chest. His body was crashing. The adrenaline rush was fading rapidly. Silence. He didn't even notice it at first. His ears had stopped ringing. Was it gone? The woods were still, eerily so. All he could hear was the pounding of his heart as it slowly came down from its frantic pace. The trees were motionless, and whatever it was had either vanished or was standing perfectly still. He felt the last of his tears roll down his cheek, but he couldn't smell it anymore. In fact, he couldn't smell anything at all. His nose was stuffed from crying. His body was shaking, drained from the exhaustion of fear. I should text or call someone to get me, but he couldn't risk it. If he pulled out his phone now, the glow of the screen might give him away if that thing is still lurking nearby. He had no idea what time it was. Darkness swallowed everything. The only thing keeping him from succumbing to his exhaustion was the gnawing thought that the creature could still be out there, watching him from the shadows. Minutes passed, then hours. He was so tired, but sleep wasn't an option. Every now and then, the crunch of leaves echoed through the woods, and he gripped his knife tightly in response. But otherwise, the forest was unnervingly quiet. No creature stirring, no owls hooting, no bats screeching in the treetops, just silence. The first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, finally shattering the long stretch of darkness. Shapes and images slowly came into focus. He looked down and saw his bow lying on the ground next to the fallen ladder. The hair on the back of his neck stood up again. His heart pounded, and his breathing quickened. All around the base of the tree were symbols drawn in the dirt. The leaves had been cleared in a perfect 10-foot circle around the tree, and those strange, unsettling symbols were etched into the ground where the leaves once were. It was now or never. He grabbed his phone and texted John, the only one close enough with a four-wheeler to come get him. It was daylight. He didn't see the creature, but there was no way he was staying in the woods any longer, and there was no way he was climbing down just in case it was lying in wait beneath the bush. "John, I'm still in my tree stand. I need help." He waited. It was 7 a.m. Please, God, let him be up. "John, dude, it's 7 a.m. What the fuck are you still doing in your tree stand?" "He's up." Tears of relief welled into his eyes as he fumbled to reply. "Come get me. Please hurry." "Okay, I'm on my way." He put his phone down, utterly exhausted. He hadn't slept all night. Then, the familiar rumble of John's ATV filled the air a few minutes later. Adrenaline surged through his veins one last time. When John was close enough to see, he grabbed his backpack and jumped, 20 feet straight down. He hit the ground hard with a loud thump. Pain shot through his body as his left leg gave out beneath him, his ankle twisting sharply. But he didn't stop to assess the damage. He fought through the pain, pushed himself up, grabbed his bow, and hobbled as fast as he could towards the ATV trail. The fear from the night before flooded back as he ran, knowing this was the moment he was the most vulnerable. Now he thought, now was the time for the creature to strike. It was the perfect opportunity. Then, the smell. The burning flesh. The scent was back, thick and nauseating, filling the air around him. John pulled up to the clearing near the stand just as he reached the ATV trail and quickly jumped onto the back of the four-wheeler. "Did you just jump from the tree stand?" John asked, his voice full of shock. "And what smells like hell up here? Drive, now!" he shouted, his voice trembling. Okay, John replied, spinning the four-wheeler around and tearing down the trail towards the house. But the fear wouldn't let go. He slumped forward onto John's back, his body too exhausted to hold himself upright. He barely had the strength to grip John's jacket to keep from falling off. The roar of the motor drowned out the sound of his sobs, tears of relief mixed with the overwhelming terror that had gripped him all night. "Are you okay?" John yelled over the noise, trying to navigate the trail. Ben didn't respond. He couldn't. He was too drained from the fear that had consumed him. The motor cut off, and he slowly lifted his head. They were outside his house. He still hadn't stopped sobbing. He rolled off the back of the four-wheeler and collapsed into the yard, the sobs racking his body. It was all he could do. Then everything went black. Ben sat up abruptly, scanning his surroundings in a panic. His mother, father, and John were there, their voices urging him to calm down. The familiar softness of their couch beneath him and the smell of his mother's cooking filled the air. He was home. His ankle was wrapped in ice, propped up on the cushion. They handed him water, and one by one, they began questioning him about what had happened that night. He told them everything. As he finished, he could see the disbelief in their eyes. His parents apologized for not checking in on him earlier. They had thought that he had come home and gone out with friends or over to John's house for a drink. John echoed the same, assuming Ben had come home tired and gone to bed. They tried to rationalize what he had seen, suggesting it might have been an emaciated bear with mange, but he knew better. He knew what he saw, what he went through. He didn't hunt for the rest of the season. He refused to enter the woods. A few days later, John went to retrieve his stand without him asking. He brought it over to his garage, a puzzled look in his eyes. "So, I found your stand," he began with an uncertain tone, "and it was on the ground. It's been beat up pretty bad, and the safety cables were ripped off, like someone had yanked it from the tree. Found your ladder, too." He pointed to the white marks on the bottom rungs of the ladder. "Those look like claw marks to me. And I found 3 of your arrows. You hit something, because they're covered in some kind of blood. I don't know what it is, but it smells like hell." He handed Ben his arrows, crusted with reddish-black goo. "Also, the tree your stand was in, the bottom half of it has been stripped of bark and smeared with what looks and smells like animal blood. And all those symbols you talked about in the dirt, they're still there." He slumped down on the edge of his four-wheeler, his expression a mix of disbelief and something close to fear. "I believe you. We didn't talk about it for a long time. It felt like something to be left forgotten, never revisited, never pursued. Eventually, Ben moved out of his parents' house and into an apartment once he started his job. The following summer, John called him with some unsettling news. The missing animals had continued, though infrequently, throughout the spring. Mr. Dawson had grown increasingly frustrated with the thefts, especially of his rabbits. Determined to catch whoever was responsible, he set up a security camera by the pen and secured the area with an industrial chain and lock. One night, his lab went berserk, barking into the direction of the rabbit pen. Figuring he had finally caught them on camera, Mr. Dawson let his dog out to scare off whoever was lurking outside. The dog bolted into the darkness, but something seemed off. He could hear a struggle. When Mr. Dawson turned on the floodlight, he found the chain on the rabbit pen broken clean off, and his dog was gone. The security camera had been destroyed before it could capture any footage of the perpetrator. Ben couldn't help but feel bad for Mr. Dawson. The truly strange part of the conversation was yet to come. The construction company John worked for had secured a contract to build a new housing development on the side of Crow Hill, the side with the pines, closest to the road. It was to be an upper middle class development, and John's crew was tasked with clearing the trees and the underbrush from the designated area. John mentioned that during the clearing process, his team stumbled upon something disturbing. In a small bottom at the base of Crow Hill, the area was dense with shrubs and underbrush, but void of any trees. As they cleared it, they noticed what looked like pathways of bent grass and branches. They didn't appear natural and were littered with small animal bones. Then they came across what can only be described as a nest, hidden in the middle of the thicket. Grass and branches were bent over, forming a makeshift dome, with long grass creating a bed inside. The outer part of the nest had strange markings in the dirt, just like he had described, and scattered around it were bizarre items, broken locks, pieces of chain, blood-covered shreds of clothing, and most chilling of all, a dog collar, threaded through the top of a canine skull. John told Ben that the tags of the collar had Mr. Dawson's name and address. He had returned them to Mr. Dawson, but couldn't bring himself to explain where he found them or in what condition. Ben could hear the tremor in John's voice. He believed him now, Without question. Several months later, he went to visit his parents. The strange disappearances had stopped, and the housing development was about halfway finished. Late that first night, he was watching the news. One of the headlines read, "Police on the lookout for animal kidnapper." Apparently, several family pets had disappeared over the last few months in the next county over. What's up, guys? I hope y'all liked that video. Figured in a little hunting season, it'd be something kind of cool to put out there. So it was a creepypasta. I thought it was really good. It's called A Night in the Tree Stand. So I hope y'all liked it. It's kind of something new that I'm trying. It's a new angle I'm going to have to take because my pay scale has changed on Facebook drastically, like 90 to 95%. So I got to do something to start garnering views on YouTube and I just got to try something different to draw more people and more of a crowd. I did well with the 4-hour tape, so I'm going to start doing more of these, and it just is what it is. So I'm trying to up my production value, and hopefully that gets me somewhere, because right now it's just things aren't cutting it, and it sucks. It really sucks. It's kind of crappy. It's had me kind of down, but I'm doing what I can to redeem the situation and get back on my feet. So make sure you like, subscribe, and share, please, and help. Anything will help. Comment, get my videos out there, and I'd really appreciate that, guys. Stay tuned. There will be more. Stay in the love, stay in the light, be kind to others. Out.